This chapter 4 is about surveys, but we won't learn in this chapter how to write survey questions. This is a very complex topic. It looks simple, but it's not. So how to write survey questions, you will learn it in Methods 2. For here in Methods 1, we will focus on sources of errors that can happen in surveys. Surveys or polls, which are surveys that are very often limited to one question, are very frequent in life in general and in social science. In a survey, subjects are asked to fill out a questionnaire. And this can be done in many ways. It can be done in person. This is what you might do in Methods 2. Write a survey and ask students around to fill it out. It can be done by mail, but now in the 21st century, this technique of surveying people is declining. It can be done on the phone. I'm sure it happens to all of you. During dinner time, the phone rings and it's a survey. And most of the time you will not answer, you will say no, and you will hang up. Online surveys are the most common forms of surveys we have now. Everyone knows SurveyMonkey. You were probably asked to answer a couple of survey questions when you started CEGEP, about online learning, about your technical capabilities, etc. So this is very common in our daily lives. All the statistics you see in serious newspapers and online in websites you can trust come from different institutes of public research specialized in surveys and polls. For example, this kind of graph you see very often, how people approve their premier in different provinces here, comes from Angus Reid Institute. This is a public opinion research foundation based in Canada. This is one you very often see in the news. An example. Another one is Ipsos. It is a multinational research company. It's more international, but it is based in Europe. Percentages and statistics and results of polls you see in the news often come from Ipsos. For example, this here is an interesting graph showing how many percent of Americans think the racial profiling and especially the killing of Floyd during the summer is part of a larger racial problem in America. And this is linked in the graph here with their political allegiance and their racial background. Another one in Canada we know very well is Léger. What you hear in the news on TV, what you read in newspapers as statistics about the economy, about politics, often come from Léger. It's a Canadian polling and market research firm that we can trust. And closer to us in Quebec, there is Sondage Crop La Presse, who is responsible of publishing a lot of polls and survey research results in the media. I'm sorry, this would usually they publish in French and it is translated by various media around the country and Europe. But we often find the results in French. For example, this one about the level of worry of Quebecers about COVID-19. It comes from Sondage or Polls Crop La Presse. So we are surrounded by data, by results of polls and surveys in the media. Can we really trust these results, even not always, but even when their samples are selected randomly? There still are sources of mistakes in these kind of research. So you'll learn how here, to what extent you can trust the results expressed by these foundations, firms, and companies. There are many sources of bias in surveys. We can classify them in two broader categories. First, sampling errors that are directly caused by the act of taking a sample, and non-sampling errors that are related to a lot of causes and factors not related to the sampling process, to the sampling method. So I will start with source of bias that come with sampling. We have seen last week how sampling methods such as convenience sampling and voluntary response sampling are sources of bias and errors, so I will not repeat it here. I will explain a third one that we haven't seen so far, which is called undercoverage. For non-sampling errors, I will explain response errors, non-response, processing errors, and leading questions or badly worded questions. Undercoverage is a kind of sampling error. It's a source of bias that happens even if we select a random sample. It happens when the whole population is not included in what we call the sampling frame. A sampling frame is your list that should include all members of the population. This list in which you give a number to all subjects, and this list that you use to select your random sample. This list ideally will cover the whole population, but very often some segments of the population are left out of it. So this population left out of the list, left out of the sampling frame, is not covered when you select this sample, and this brings what we call undercoverage. One example, the census in Canada is supposed to be an official list of all Canadian citizens. However, the homeless are not included in that list because they don't have an address to which the authorities could send the census questionnaire. So this is a source of undercoverage, source of bias. Suppose that you want to make a study among all teenagers in Quebec, teenagers aged 13 to 18, and as a sampling frame, as a list that should include all your population, you use student lists of high schools and cégeps. There will be undercoverage because it's not all teenagers that are in school, especially those above 16. They might have dropped out of school, so they will not be included in the sampling frame. This will bring undercoverage. Now let's see non-sampling errors. The first one is called non-response. It's when some individuals in your selected sample will not give you data, will not participate, will refuse. And it is a very common problem that happens when you do surveys. It can happen in many occasions. For example, you have a sample, a random sample of residents of Hull here, and you go from door to door to contact them, and they will not answer the door for many reasons, because they're not there, or because they don't want to, or they answer the door, they open the door, and they see it's a survey, and they say, no, I'm sorry, and they don't answer. Phone surveys, same thing. People will not want to answer the survey. Mail surveys, same thing. People will receive the survey in the mail, they will ignore it. Online surveys, and it can happen in many occasions. You don't want to answer the survey, either because you're not interested, you don't have time, or you don't like the topic, etc. Response error is another kind of non-sampling error. It's when a subject actually fill out the survey or answers the poll question, but not the right way. The subject gives incorrect information. It can happen in many occasions. Maybe the subject does not understand the question and doesn't want to look dumb, so will answer anything. Or the subject just does not know the answer. If one student in Methods 2 last year was asking students the income of their family. Some students kind of didn't know or not sure, so they guessed. But this could bring a response error. It's when you answer something that is not the right answer. If I do a survey about some sensitive topics, your drug habits or your sex life, you might answer the wrong information because you don't want to disclose the right information. This is another source of response error. Processing errors are human mistakes that happen when you handle your data. You have raw data you have to enter electronically, so you make typos, you skip a line, you repeat a line, you do all sorts of mistakes because you're a human being, and this will bring errors in your research. So we call these kind of errors processing errors. It's when you process the data, you make mistakes. And finally, the nature of the questions themselves can bring bias, can bring mistakes in the results of a survey. For example, some people can be clumsy while writing the questions. So the questions are badly worded, they're hard to understand, they're wordy, they're vague, and this will influence the answers. In some other occasions, the researchers maybe have a hidden agenda when they write the questions. So they will write leading questions voluntarily or maybe not voluntarily, but they will write leading questions that will push the respondents to answer positively or negatively, and this will bring bias to the research. This is an example here. Until a few years ago, Canadian peacekeepers were present in Afghanistan. And some people agreed with that, some people disagreed with that. And suppose that you want to know how many % of Canadians agree with the presence of peacekeepers, of soldiers in Afghanistan. So you could ask a very plainly worded, clear question such as, do you agree or disagree with the presence of Canadian soldiers in Afghanistan? That's clear, that's unbiased as a question. But if you have an agenda here, if you want to write a leading question and you want people to answer, yes, you agree. They agree with the presence of Canadians there. So you will write a question like the first one here. Are you for or against Canada playing an active role in murdering citizens of Afghanistan in the name of peace? People will say, no, I don't want innocent people to be murdered. So they will answer here, no, I'm against the presence of Canada in Afghanistan. It's a leading question here. The second question wants to know the same thing, but leading in another way. Are you for or against Canada's military participation in ensuring that Afghanistan is safe for all? Of course you want Afghanistan to be safe for all. You don't want people to be killed. So you will say, yes, I approve the presence of Canada in Afghanistan. So it's the same question here, but it will lead people to answer, yes, I agree with that. Whereas the other one was pushing people to answer, no, I disagree. But it's the same question. Beware of these questions when you answer surveys.